purposes of the blue economy and what it is that Kenyans envisage. If this House is going to let a few hungry individuals who at that time were politically correct, Mr. Speaker, then it is going to be a total shame. And with those, Mr. Speaker, I beg to reply. Thank you very much.
Very well. Now, honourable members, before the member for Kitutu Church North, I think this is important information that actually this committee has considered audited accounts of 30 state corporations, and for most, the committee considered more than 3 financial years. So they have been able to update most of those 30 state corporations. The report is almost 900 pages. It's here. It's available for people to come and peruse, confirm those issues that the Honorable Abdul Samad has referred to. But I think also, honourable members, granted that this country has got currently 396 state corporations. Now you can see the wisdom in the decision that you took to split this committee into 3, so that those who are coming to Parliament, to the 13th Parliament, this committee will be split into 3. And the authority was given to the Speaker to indicate which of the 3 committee will consider reports, the audited accounts of which state corporations. Because as it is now, 30. It's a big job that the committee has done, but it's only 30 of the 396. So you can imagine it's a lot of work, and therefore, while I commend this committee for the work that they have done, it is also good that the House has taken the decision to split this committee for efficiency and also to try and bring all the corporations up to speed and up to date with regard to their audited accounts, because many of them have some accounts, and the Honorable Jimmy Angwenyu has also served in this committee. Honorable Ishongwa, you all know, Honorable Abdulrahman, that there are several other corporations, some of which are merely regulatory, and it's only fair that they should be burdened in some way so that all of them are brought up to speed. The country needs to deal with up-to-date, the Honorable Abdulrahman just talked about some things that the Honorable Kimunya may have done when he was Minister for Transports and maybe Finance. And, now if we are dealing with issues that happened that long ago, really, it's become too much historical. Things happened that after he left. But nevertheless, it is too long ago for us to contemplate. So anyway, I think the House has taken a good decision to split that committee. So, honourable members, I put the question, which is that this House adopts the report, the 24th report of the Public Investments Committee on its consideration of the Auditor General's reports on financial statements of state corporations laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, May 31st, 2022. Will as many as that opinion say aye? As many as the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Now we can consider the supplementary appropriations.
Order number 20, the supplementary appropriation number 2 bill, National Assembly Bill number 33 of 2022, second reading.
Chair, budget.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that the supplementary appropriations number 2 bill, National Assembly Bill number 33 of 2022 be read a second time. Honorable Speaker, this is a matter that we have ably canvassed through the motion that we adopted yesterday, Honorable Speaker, and I believe that most of the issues and the matters are still fresh with the members, and I don't want to both members, again with a whole report, but I will just, Honorable Speaker, highlight a few issues that have been captured in this supplementary budget. Honorable Speaker, we raised quite a number of issues. One on the use of the Article 223, as you had clearly guided this House, and Honorable Speaker, we noted that the Article 223 continues not to be properly followed by Treasury, and we are hoping that as we move to the next dispensation, the Article 223 should be properly used as envisaged in our Constitution. Honorable Speaker, the main highlights of the supplementary budget two mostly is to an increase on the fuel subsidy. Honorable Speaker, in this supplementary budget too, quite a substantial amount of money has been allocated to fuel subsidy, about 16 billion shillings. Honorable Speaker, this is an issue that moving forward must be dealt with substantively, because every other month the government is subsidizing fuel to a tune of about 10 billion shillings. It's not sustainable, Honorable Speaker. There has to be a way that is sustainable, Honorable Speaker. However, we have allowed that, Honorable Speaker, for the time being. Honorable Speaker, there is also the subsidy on fertilizer. The prices of fertilizer have been high, Honorable Speaker, and it has been a concern of members here, Honorable Speaker, that the fertilizer prices have been up, and we are happy that a chunk of funds have been set aside for the fuel subsidy, for the fertilizer subsidy. Honorable Speaker, 8 billion shillings have also been set aside for the road infrastructure, and basically is to complete the ongoing road infrastructure cut across the country from Mombasa, Nairobi, and to our rural areas. Honorable Speaker, the other issue that has also been captured, of course, is the drought mitigation. Honorable Speaker, the failed rains in the country have created as a hunger in literally all parts of the country, and 1 billion shillings have been set aside, Honorable Speaker, to mitigate that. Honorable Speaker, there is also revision in A&A, which is a good thing, Honorable Speaker, because it means that our economy is rebounding back, Honorable Speaker, especially in the education sector, the tourism sector. So there is an increase in the A&A. Honorable Speaker, a nagging issue that has always been with us is the pending bills. Honorable Speaker, there has been attempts to pay a few pending bills, but substantively, Honorable Speaker, there has to be a way how Treasury and also the county governments are going to deal with the issue of the pending bills. Honorable Speaker, there is also funding for the railway from Logonot to Nakuru. Honorable Speaker, there were sometimes hue and cry that the railway going to Naivasha was not ending somewhere. This one, with Honorable Speaker, with the provision of these funds, Honorable Speaker, there will be an extension of the meter gauge railway from Logonot to Nakuru to make sure that goods are evacuated from Logonot to Nakuru to join the rest of the meter gauge railway, and vice versa. Honorable Speaker, there is also enhanced security, Honorable Speaker. It's everywhere, Honorable Speaker, literally in northeastern, in coast, Honorable Speaker, we have had cases of insecurity, and there is heightened security surveillance. So there was provision for the heightened security, also considering that this is also an election year. Honorable Speaker, the reductions that we have observed, Honorable Speaker, is on the donor-funded projects. And it's a concern, Honorable Speaker, to the committee, because most of the donor-funded projects have gotten a reduction, and the answer was, the simple answer was low absorption, which of course begs the question, why the low absorption? Honorable Speaker, with that, Honorable Speaker, I beg to move and request the MP for Uriri, Engineer Nyamita, to second. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Nyamita.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, indeed, I think the Chair has done justice in moving the second supplementary appropriations bill. I hear murmurs from the chambers, Mr. Speaker, that when they say that the railway, that was said railway to nowhere, is now being moved to Nakuru, they still think Nakuru is nowhere. I think eventually we will allocate more funds so that it connects with the other one in Kisumu. And finally, it will get somewhere. You know, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all the other chairs of the various committees who took their time to give in their feedback quickly, especially on this second supplementary. I want to say overally that there still needs to be a bit more attention on how we exercise the use of Article 223, especially by Treasury. We continue to see items that are not necessarily very urgent. So I think the planning department, and hopefully in the next regime, the planning department of the National Treasury needs to be given a bit more work so that we can plan better instead of having a lot of expenditure going under Article 223. Whereas there's also been hue and cry, I think, of the cost of fuel. As Mr. Speaker, you'll appreciate that this government has done a bit of work in trying to cushion Kenyans against the high cost of fuel compared to what is happening across the region, because it's a fact that in Kenya, Honorable Ichung'wah, I hear you shouting, but it is a fact that if you compare our cost of fuel and what is in our neighboring countries, we possibly are one of the ones who are charging the lowest, and it's courtesy of the subsidy that the government is actually continuing to provide. And maybe it's about time we begin to look at maybe other alternatives into the future, because the truth of the matter is that despite the subsidy, the cost of living is still at an all-time high. I think, Mr. Speaker, as we are nearing the close of this parliamentary session, the 13th Parliament, which is, we're closing Parliament tomorrow, we do wish that the next government really will go through all the reports, especially during this, what happened during this 13th Parliament, because it is only this Parliament that we have experienced COVID that has affected the economy, and now we are feeling the aftershocks of the wars in Ukraine and the high cost of living, and that the planning in the next season would be better. Indeed, this is a second supplementary budget, which ordinarily shouldn't happen. I mean, good practice should be that we have at least one budget and a supplementary to go for. But when we have a supplementary towards second supplementary, in fact, we have been on record at some point having had 3 supplementaries within a financial year, showing to an indication of the gaps that we have within Treasury. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to second.
Members, I propose the question, which is the Supplementary Appropriation Number 2 Bill, National Assembly Bill Number 33 of 2022, be now read a second time. Yeah, I know there are some members who don't want to. Honorable Oundo, are you contributing this?
Honorable Speaker, thank you for this opportunity. And I want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues that indeed National Treasury has continuously and without shame abused Article 223 in respect of supplementary budget. Honorable Speaker, we have a few weeks to the end of the financial year. Indeed, it beats logic where there have been all these years, all these months, in order to bring a supplementary budget to resize or reset the budget we passed last year. Honorable Speaker, indeed again it looks a bit unfair, in so to speak, because we have a lot of money being allocated towards infrastructure projects that indeed requires procurement, tendering, and the rest of the process and award. I'm just wondering, when the chair was presenting, wondering how will they manage to procure and get to commit the funds before the end of the financial year. Unless, of course, there's a suggestion that the works has been done and this is just being used as a cover-up to avoid accumulation of pending bills. Honorable Speaker, it is indeed again saddening that donor-funded projects have not received adequate counterpart funding, simply the reason being low absorption. Indeed, if there's low absorption, how then will they absorb the 8 billion for the roads infrastructure? How will they absorb the several billions that are being put on the railway long note to Nakuru railway line. Honorable Speaker, indeed this is a pure case of probably lack of foresight, lack of planning that seems now to get us into a fix. Finally, Honorable Speaker, it is laudable, yes, subsidy on fertilizers. There has been a hue and cry all over the country, and it became a hot political potato. And I think it's good that the government has risen to the occasion and has given subsidized fertilizers to farmers. But it's telling that most of the planting season has ended. I don't know who will be the recipient of the subsidized fertilizer towards the end of the red planting season. Finally, Honorable Speaker, the issue of fuel subsidy, I totally agree, and this is a debate we have had in other circles, is not sustainable. That's the fact of the matter. It's not sustainable, and indeed, the country and national treasury and the energy sector needs to go to the drawing board. The 16 billion we have allocated, the other time I think it was 15 billion, another time was 10 billion. This is not sustainable. Considering that quite a number of the reason for high fuel prices are the endless taxes imposed on fuel, it's probably time that we look at the whole thing altogether. With those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I support.
Member for Endebess.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for allowing me to contribute to this supplementary budget. Just to join my colleagues, Honorable Speaker, this issue about fuel subsidy of 16 billion, I really find it inappropriate, because when you look at it, you are regularizing an amount of money of 16 billion, yet we already had a subsidy of from the fuel levy fund, which should have been used to subsidize the fuel prices. So how do you now come in to borrow money to be able to pay for fuel subsidy from the consolidated fund? So, Honorable Speaker, I think there is some misuse. When you even talk of 1 billion being used for drought mitigation, as we speak today, Honorable Speaker, there are parts of Kenya where it is raining. We're talking of areas not in the North Rift and South Rift. When you go to even Western Kenya and some parts of the South Rift, people are harvesting. I heard the other time some unscrupulous dealers saying that they should be allowed to import. Right now, we are actually in our maize is beyond even the top tracing. It's at tasseling level, meaning within the next 2 months, we should be now preparing to harvest. Now, this fuel subsidy of 1 billion is coming at a moment when we don't need it. We've already planted our maize. People have already, we are already in the process of waiting for the maturity of the crops. So how do we benefit from this fuel subsidy of 1 billion? And yet, even the 1 billion that was the fertilizer that has been subsidized with the 1 billion, it's not available, because many of the farmers, take for instance Kitale in the North Rift, many of the farmers have been going to the cereals. They line up for 2 weeks without getting the fertilizer subsidy, the subsidized fertilizer. So, whom are we subsidizing this fertilizer for? To me, it seems it is a business. It is stealing even from the public, because when you subsidize to an extent of 1 billion and the intended farmer does not get the subsidized fertilizer, it does not even go to the intended beneficiary, so that it goes into the crops, into the food security for this country, then we are missing the point. Another area which I'm seeing that there is some bit of is opaque is the issue of giving money for security purposes. This has always been misused. And I think with now the split of the PIC into even 3 committees, we need to be able to look at very clearly how that money is going to have been used. Because as we head into the elections, Honorable Speaker, many of the technocrats think that this government is going. Now, as the government is going, people are thinking of ways of how can we be able to get money from the national coffers. And I think this is an area that we need to be very careful, that when we look at the audit reports of areas that we've allocated money, areas of food security, areas of fertilizer subsidy, areas of even the road infrastructure, I think it will be very important that the next parliament scrutinizes these areas, especially when it comes to transition, to make sure that anybody who has inappropriately acquired money during this time in an illegal way should be brought to book. So with those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I beg to support.
Member for Nyando.
I thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity. And I also join my colleagues in expressing my concern that a supplementary 2 is coming at such a suspicious moment when we have already started debating the annual estimates and will be passing it soon. So, Honorable Speaker, during electioneering periods such as this, certain things happen that are swept under the rags without our people getting to know the gist of all these issues. But we hope that the budget means well. It will address fundamental areas. I know during this electioneering period, Security Department does need a lot of funding to provide adequate security during campaigns, during elections, and probably after elections. But we hope this time round the country will not face any disturbing situations that call for backup security. Honorable Speaker, if Kenya is an agricultural country and we generate our revenue from agriculture, how I wish that lots of funding will go towards that angle. We still grapple with huge prices or high prices of inputs. Buying a tractor in this country, buying fertilizer, buying all these the components around agriculture, we still have to spend so much money. Yet again, we talk about subsidy each and every time. So I hope, Honorable Speaker, that the incoming government, beginning September or rather August this year, will pay much attention to this issue of agriculture and hence create more employment opportunities to our youth. A lot has been said about tourism, and we reckon that many countries have been affected by corona, global warming, the war in Ukraine, and many other aspects. But Kenya being a touristic country or a touristic destination, we also need to look at ways of encouraging many visitors to come so that through that we can have money or generate money. In terms of dollars, today the Kenyan shilling has received quite a beating against the American dollar. And if we encourage tourism, visitors coming in to trade with their dollars, then we are going to have enough dollars to even do international trade. Just 2 weeks ago, Kenya did not have enough dollars to even pay for fuel, and therefore meaning that if we have to convert Kenyan shillings to the dollar, then we have to pay much more than what we have traditionally been paying. 100 shillings to a dollar is now 120 shillings to an American dollar. And therefore our money is becoming weak by the day. And in order to attain favorable balance of trade, we must encourage the sectors that produce more into our economy, Honorable Speaker. And that is why when I heard hues and cries about second-hand clothing, Honorable Speaker, I'm wondering, why should people cry that we are stopping or closing the international market that brings in clothing into this country to the detriment of Kikomi, Rivertex, and many others? let us put more emphasis on developing our own. Buy Kenya, build Kenya. But the moment we ship in clothing from those international markets, Honorable Speaker, we are equally shipping jobs abroad. And I know the UDA presidential candidate a few months ago also talked about stopping second-hand clothing coming into Kenya. And therefore, when the shoe is on a different foot, then it becomes a real concern. So, Honorable Speaker, let us put monies into areas that will generate more and try to bring in or import less, but export the more for a favorable balance of trade, Honorable Speaker. And with that, I support Supplementary 2 budget, and I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. What's your point of order, Honorable Kiari?
Mr. Speaker, we are actually in the last few hours of this 12th Parliament, and time is very precious, Mr. Speaker. And while I appreciate that the debate on this supplementary matter is very important, I am standing on standing order number 95, requesting, Mr. Speaker, that you would ask the mover to reply so that we can cover much more ground this afternoon as we move on. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Well, now, honour members, I'd already given the member for Kipkelion East the mic so that he can, once he finishes, I can then test what the Honourable KJ has.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this very important bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I want to say about this, Mr. Speaker, is that it is a great concern, Mr. Speaker, that supplementaries in this country has been turned into just is a rubber stamp, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say this, that if this House is going to be respected, Mr. Speaker, we must follow the law to the letter. We cannot be used as a rubber stamp, because if you look at the items which have been listed, Mr. Speaker, practically it is impossible to implement any allocations which have been put here which have not been spent. Mr. Speaker, Article 223 of the Constitution did not indicate in any way that it can be used by National Treasury in making a budget which has not been approved by this House. It was actually intended to be used in good faith if there are certain items which had not been budgeted by this House, Mr. Speaker. But what has happened, Mr. Speaker, is that the executive, through the back door, have taken over the work of budget making by ensuring that whatever they intend to do and has not been approved by this House, or this House is not intending to approve, they just say, don't worry, put it on supplementary, or don't worry, we'll spend it on 223. One of the dangers which has actually brought this country down, Mr. Speaker, is the supplementary has been, Article 223 has been misused because the National Treasury has been spending and holding any approvals which this House has passed without implementation. You'll find this House has passed a certain project, but it will not be implemented. It will be held ransom by National Treasury and the executive until such a time that they have actually allocated money through 233. They use that money, then they bring to this House to approve, and they kill the allocations which had been done by this House. On the other side, Mr. Speaker, there are so many projects which have not been implemented or have been implemented without funding, and that has caused a lot of problem and accumulated a lot of pending bills and killed a lot of businesses in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, as this House considers this, we should look for a way of passing a message to the National Treasury. And in fact, the best message to the National Treasury is to shoot down certain number of supplementary, even like this one, you can shoot down, so that you make sure that any applications which are not supported by the law, Mr. Speaker, they become spending without authority, so that those who spend without authority will be held responsible, Mr. Speaker. But the moment we just say, anyway, it has been spent, we just pass it, we are actually legalizing illegalities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are so many spendings which are very, very inappropriate, Mr. Speaker. What do we say when a country like this one, where expenditures which we support, that yes, the late President Mwai Kibaki was a good president. We were supposed to give him a very good send-off, Mr. Speaker. But how can we support a heavy spending like 260 million in just 1 week, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, you cannot actually convince anybody in this country that that thing is supposed to be signed by this country, by this House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, Mr. Speaker, I want to say this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we were passing yesterday, when this House passed yesterday, the extension of borrowing limit, Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of danger in that, Mr. Speaker. It was very painful that this House passed. But, Mr. Speaker, it is very shameful that we don't consider how this borrowing is killing the economy of this country. Mr. Speaker, there is a very dangerous trend in this country. Once we expand the borrowing limit, Mr. Speaker, we are supposed to make sure that National Treasury gives us a breakdown of borrowing. Mr. Speaker, what has killed the economy in this country is not only borrowing in general. It is a makeup of borrowing. During the leadership of Mwai Kibaki, there was a trend where the banks were hawking loans outside their banks. There were a lot of tents everywhere. Why, Mr. Speaker? It is because Kibaki was a very smart economist. What he did is starve the banks. The local banks were starved, and therefore they were looking for customers. What is happening now, Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury is actually borrowing from the local market. So what has happened is that the government right now is competing with the public. So the banks do not see the need of giving Mama Mboga, Boda Boda. They are not seeing any need of giving them credit. Why? Because they are considered to be risky. The government is a very fat ground for business, for the banks. So what a very serious government is supposed to do, and I can actually witness here, Mr. Speaker, that in the last review, when I was a chair of Finance Committee, the National Treasury actually did not give this House correct information. What they did, they tricked this House that they are going to restructure the public debt. They were supposed to go outside this country, negotiate bilateral and multilateral loans, which are concessional in terms of interest rates. Then they repay the domestic loans, which they didn't do, Mr. Speaker. So what has happened is the SMEs and the local borrowers are not able to get any loans, which has actually strained their finances, and they have closed down, Mr. Speaker. So what I can say now is, Mr. Speaker, if the government is going to borrow and they are not going to restructure the borrowing, it is not going to work. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the reason why we have these supplementary budgets is because of lack of planning. Let us challenge the National Treasury to plan properly so that when they are bringing budget to this House, they have thought well, and it is well funded, so that you cannot come after passing budget, you come and ask this House to pass extension or expansion of borrowing limit, because we did not plan how to finance the budget. So, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I'm actually not going to support this appropriation bill. I'll ask this House to reject it, so that who are responsible for managing this economy are actually held responsible, because it will be taken as an approved spending, Mr. Speaker, and that is when this House will be respected. As long as we allow ourselves to be rubber stamped, Mr. Speaker, we are not going to be respected. Mr. Speaker, I end by saying I urge this House to teach National Treasury and Executive a lesson. Let us reject this appropriation bill.
Now, honourable members, remember the member for Dagoretti saw the stool in his place and claimed that the mover be called upon to reply and are standing on number 95. It's only fair that I put that to question so that we know how to proceed. I therefore put the question, which is that the mover be called upon to reply. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Many of the opinion say nay. Nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to thank everybody who has actually contributed, Honorable Speaker, and we take the contribution very, very seriously, Honorable Speaker. On your guidance on Article 2 to 3, Honorable Speaker, we have been following very, very closely, and we urge that the next administration or the next committee in the next parliament to be vigilant, Honorable Speaker. With that, I beg to reply. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honourable members, I'll still put the question, which is that the Supplementary Appropriations Bill number 2, National Assembly Bill number 33 of 2022 be read a second time. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. As many of the contrary opinion say nay? Nay. The ayes have it. Yes.
A bill for an act of parliament to authorize the issue of certain sums of money out of the consolidated fund and their application towards the service of the year ending on the 30th June 2022 and to appropriate those sums for certain public services and purposes.
Very well. Yeah? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to rise on a point of order on standing order number 83. Honorable Speaker, maybe ask the Honorable Kanini Kega to relax because it's not on the Supplementary Appropriations Bill. I know he never wanted me to speak about the expenditure on the funeral of President Moi Kibaki, 260 million. He never wanted me to speak about the 400 million going to Afri cities in Kisumu. And that is why and of course the railway development levy. Honorable Speaker, my point of order was on standing order number 83 on the constitutionality. Honorable Speaker, if you see the order paper, the next order, Honorable Speaker, sorry, my order number 21, I think on the new supplementary order paper. Honorable Speaker, you have guided us before on issues to do with constitutionality of bills. And I rise on this standing order number 83 on the constitutionality of the Universities Amendment Bill number 2 of 2021, which is set to proceed to Committee of the Whole House as the next order. And Honorable Speaker, you have guided us before that at any point in time, if a member feels that a bill is tainted with unconstitutionality, that we may rise in our place and ask you to offer guidance, and that's why I seek your guidance on the constitutionality of this particular bill, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to invite you to rule on the constitutionality of this bill in respect to two aspects. One on Article 10 of the Constitution and on Article 201 of the Constitution, Honorable Speaker. On Article 10, Honorable Speaker, which speaks to our national values and principles of governance, Honorable Speaker, the Constitution is very clear. And if you look at the bill in clauses 13 and 14, this bill gives very huge sweeping powers to the Cabinet Secretary in charge of education to appoint vice chancellors of public universities and the power to revoke any appointment of the members of university councils. These powers, Honorable Speaker, in the bill are without any limitations or checks and balances. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, I find that this bill in this particular clause 13 and 14 falls contra to Article 10 of the Constitution, since public universities will henceforth be subject to the control and direction by the Cabinet Secretary in charge of education. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, that, in my view, would be very unconstitutional and will fall contra to the provisions of Article 10 on good governance as spelled out in our Constitution. Honorable Speaker, on Article 201, the bill violates Article 201 of the Constitution as it provides, which provides that public money shall be used in a prudent and responsible manner. And Honorable Speaker, to the extent that this bill seeks to accentuate the current practice for placement of government-sponsored students in private universities, even when there are vacancies, Honorable Speaker, in our public universities. And Honorable Speaker, it is important to note that I must make disclosure that I speak and I want to speak on behalf of our public universities. Honorable Speaker, many of our public universities, including our premier public universities like the University of Nairobi, are on their knees financially. Kenyatta University, Moi University in Eldoret, I think if it's not closed down now, it's probably on the verge of being closed down, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, when we pass a bill that is placing students in private universities at the expense of public universities, Honorable Speaker, then we are going to be acting in a manner that is contrary to the Article 201 that provides for prudent use of public resources, because it is public resources that are funding these students who are being placed in our universities. Additionally, Honorable Speaker, Article 2.1 of the Constitution provides that financial management shall be responsible and fiscal reporting clear, that all public money, Honorable Speaker, shall be managed in a manner that is responsible, and the fiscal reporting shall be clear. If you look at Clause 18 of the bill, which deals with the universities fund, it provides for allocation of public funds to private universities without subjecting the same private universities to the Public Audit Act of 2015 in terms of reporting and accounting for public funds. Honorable Speaker, where we appropriate money, and the Honorable Pukose just mentioned in the previous motion, that when we appropriate money in this House, Honorable Speaker, whether we are appropriating that money to a public institution, that public institution must be subject to the Public Audit Act of 2015, and that is why the Public Investments Committee reviews the accounts of even our public universities. When, Honorable Speaker, under this bill, we now give money to private universities that are not being audited by the Auditor General, what confidence do we have, Honorable Speaker, and what assurance do we have that indeed this money is going to benefit, one, real students that exist? Because, Honorable Speaker, those who sit in the Public Accounts Committee can tell you, because it's a matter that has been before the Public Accounts Committee, cases where there are ghost students being sent to private universities purposely for capitation. And Honorable Speaker, I know because that matter is still alive before the Public Accounts Committee, we hope that maybe it's a matter that will come to light when they table their reports. But Honorable Speaker, my point is that we must ensure that where you appropriate money in this House, it is being audited by the Auditor General, so that we ensure that Kenyans are getting value for money. Honorable Speaker, thirdly is on Article 43(1)(f) of the Constitution, which provides for the right of every person to education. And the bill, Honorable Speaker, is an affront to this particular article of the Constitution, as it now allows the placement of government-sponsored students in private universities, even in instances, Honorable Speaker, where there are vacancies in public universities. Hence, they're getting the right of government-sponsored students to education in a university of their choice. And Honorable Speaker, I am very keen on this particular provision, Honorable Speaker, because I am very passionate on education matters. Many members here will bear we bear witness that we have hundreds, if not thousands, of our students who pass their KCSE. They are placed in private universities, and with the government capitation that is going to these private universities, are not able to meet the requisite fees in public universities, in private universities. Many of those university students fall back to our constituencies looking for CDF bursaries to be able to cater for their education in campus. And where they don't get it, Honorable Speaker, many end up falling off the education system. And that is how you will see the rise in the issues that have been raised before the Public Accounts Committee of ghost students. Because a student was placed in a private university, they could not afford to continue their education for 4 years in that private university. So after the first 1 year, they drop out. But they continue in government books as students who are in those private universities, and government money continues to get wasted. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, in this regard, I honestly want to seek your guidance on the constitutionality of this bill. And these are issues, Honorable Speaker, that we had identified. I know a number of members had identified some of these unconstitutional issues in this bill. Honorable Speaker, when you ordered or directed the committee, and I wish the chair of this committee was in this house today, because when you directed them to go and do what you called winnowing of the many amendments that were members had proposed, the committee then engaged in what to me was a PR exercise. Many members, and Honorable Speaker, allow me to speak on behalf of the Honorable Sankok, who has just told me this matter is too heavy on him because he had amendments knowing what Masai Mara University is to him and to the people of Narok County. And he told me he saw an invite to appear for winnowing before the Education Committee at the time when he was mourning his son. And he's asked me to speak on his behalf because he actually indicated to me that he had written to the clerk to protest that he was being invited at the time he was mourning his son to come for winnowing. And he actually told me he sent the chair, the clerk who sent him that message, a reply, and asked him how callous this committee could be, knowing that he was bereaved, and are now inviting him for winnowing. He says, worse still, Honorable Speaker, and these are the words of the Honorable Sankok, that at that time he was mourning, he's invited to the committee, he says he's not able to come up, the committee goes ahead to disregard all his amendments and tables a report that has trashed all his amendments. Honorable Speaker, I had amendments on these particular issues of constitutionality. And also the bill, Honorable Speaker, said it did not concern counties. But there are issues that concern counties, Honorable Speaker, in the bill, and some that I carried in amendments. I was never invited for winnowing, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, besides the issues of our constitutionality, I would also want you, Honorable Speaker, to guide the House on what is it that the committee should do when you direct that they engage in a process of winnowing, the winnowing of amendments, Honorable Speaker. Because what was done by the committee, and it's sad that the chair, and I don't know who the vice chair is of this committee, is not in the House, because I have engaged her on one-on-one and asked her, why is it that you never invited some of us, like myself, to come and appear before the committee with all the amendments that I had for winnowing? Honorable Speaker, I also want you to rule on that issue, because the committee engaged in what amounted to a PR exercise, and then tabled a report that has trashed all the amendments that members had. And Honorable Speaker, the issue of our public universities is so sensitive to many of our members. Many of these universities are in our backyards. I have the Kikuyu campus of the University of Nairobi that supported the Goto village and the Goto shopping center 10, 8 years ago. Today that campus is a pale shadow of what it was. Murang'a University, Honorable Speaker, Karatina University, all these public universities, Honorable Speaker, are closing down. And they are not closing down because our children are not qualifying to join public universities. They are closing down because of such bills and such provisions where we are funding private universities at the expense of our public institutions, Honorable Speaker. History will judge us very harshly, Honorable Speaker, if we rush to pass such a bill and tomorrow or 2 years down the line, we probably have 1 or 2 of the premier public universities surviving. And even those premier universities like the University of Nairobi, Moi University, Kenyatta University, Honorable Speaker, are on their deathbed. If you go through the report of the committee, Honorable Speaker, look at how many people representing public universities appeared before that committee during public participation, Honorable Speaker. I have gone through that report, Honorable Speaker. What happened is that some association of public universities is what was invited by the committee. Look where is Professor, what's his name, Professor Njoroge of Kenyatta University. Look for Professor Kiama of Nairobi University. Where are their views in that report, Honorable Speaker? But when you go to the private universities, you will find real vice chancellors and directors of public universities. Why is it that our public universities were never listened to, and they come through some amorphous association called the Association of Public Universities, Honorable Speaker? Honorable Speaker, I speak for and on behalf of our public institutions because I have taken my time to engage with vice chancellors of our public universities, and they are all crying and begging, and they have in fact been lobbying many members of parliament that when it comes to consideration of this bill, Honorable Speaker, I would even beg, Honorable Speaker, we consider such a bill at a time when the House is properly quorated and we have numbers, Honorable Speaker, because these are matters that touch on the majority of the Kenyans that we represent. Honorable Speaker, I beg for your guidance, Honorable Speaker, and I will be obliged, Honorable Speaker, by whatever guidance you would give us, especially on the constitutionality.
All of you have placed the interventions. So there's no need, let me just hear as many of you as possible. Honorable Murugara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also rise to agree with the Honorable Ichung'wa that you actually guide us on the 2 matters raised, including the constitutionality of the bill, because we are supposed to be dealing with the public universities as regards public money. But in a manner that cannot be explained, we are actually diverting public money to private universities at the expense of public universities. It is sad to note that we are not able to charter any more universities now because majority of them are reeling in debt and they are on the verge of collapse. I have been pursuing the government for a long time so that my own university, Tharaka University College, can actually be chartered. The response I got is that there is no money to charter that university because even those that are chartered are in lots of problems. And today, as we sit in this August House, we are passing a law that is going to channel public money to public universities where it is not going to be accounted for. This to private universities where it is not going to be accounted for. This flies in the face of our Constitution, Article 10, that in good governance, public money must be well spent and must be well accounted for. Therefore, as we reject this, it is my wish that those students that are being taken to private universities contrary to their wishes, and I'm aware of this because university students who have passed very well find themselves in third-rate universities like Mount Kenya University, a university that has questionable credentials at all times. But that is where they find themselves. They come up with sloppy degrees and they have issues when it comes to employment. I would wish to see Tharaka University chartered and commissioned so that it is a fully fledged public university in our constituency and our county. But if we continue doing this, it will remain a pipe dream. Number two, and very important, on the 9th of May 2022, I and a couple of other members of parliament were invited for harmonization, the winnowing of the proposed amendments. Those members included Honorable Owen Bayer, Didimas Baraza, John Kiarie, David Sankok, Robert Pukose, Silvana Sosoro, and myself. And as you have heard, Honorable Speaker, the others like Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah were not invited. Let me speak for myself because I appeared before the committee and I had my proposed amendments, which today are on the order paper. I was actually heard very well, very amicable. They spoke to me very well, and they fully agreed with the proposed amendments. To my utter surprise, I've seen the report. I do not know what changed and when it changed. Those proposed amendments were totally rejected, and they were not even one was carried. Sincerely, this was not an harmonization process. This was not winnowing as we know it under Standing Order 131. This was a sham exercise to try and please those who had proposed amendments, while the committee knew very well that it was not going to allow any of them for extraneous reasons, reasons that cannot be explained in this House. And this is why we ask you, Honorable Speaker, to guide us appropriately as regards the various constitutional issues we are raising, and also Standing Order number 131. What is the purpose of harmonization once the House commits a bill to a committee and asks it to harmonize proposed amendments? I seek to be guided.
Kilifi North.
Thank you very much. I stand on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, to actually agree with the Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah. One of the tenets of great democracy is, and constitutionalism is freedom from discrimination. You have students who are now being sent to public universities and others to private universities. These are two different lanes. But then you take students that you give undue advantage because you're taking them to private universities which give better infrastructure, and that's why they're private, because their infrastructure is different from public universities. So now we are saying that my son will go to a public university, but the same body places another person's son who has gone through the system in a private university without them giving the opportunity to choose whether to go to public or private. That is discrimination and should not happen. When students are being placed by this government, they should be placed in public universities. Those who want to go to private universities, let them make a choice, elect a choice that they're going to private universities without having to use taxpayers' money that gives them undue advantage over the others. And that's a constitutional issue, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, today, public universities are dying. And we know, our university is my backyard, Pwani University, which has a very ambitious strategic plan, a plan that would have been funded by the Exchequer. But a lot of this money now is not going to these public universities, who the late President Kibaki really put his foot down to ensure that universities exist. And if you look at the Land Grant Act in the United States of why public universities are there, they are centers of development in the rural areas. Where there is a public university or a state university in the United States, you see that the town grows and everything else grows. And you see a lot of the states in the United States have grown because of the presence of a state universities under the Land Grant Act. Today, we are taking away that great thought, that if you put a university in Kilifi, it will grow and grow the town, grow the economy around there, and everybody else benefits. We are taking this money to public universities, private universities that are in towns, private universities that are owned by people, making a few people rich using government money, disregarding the Public Finance Management Act, that this public money must be audited. If you take it to Kabarak University, if you take it to Mount Kenya University, you can see Mount Kenya University, the way it is flourishing. And you ask you why? Because government money is being pumped there. Sometimes I sit down and wonder, are there people politically connected that are actually benefiting from this money? Why is Kabrak University now funded more than Pwani University in my backyard? Is it because a son of a prominent man actually is the owner of that university? These are the questions that we must ask. And therefore, this bill, Mr. Speaker, should be given due time to be looked at and scrutinized, and those amendments that I have particularly proposed looked at a different session, not when we just have little time, a few hours to sign die, and then we want to pass these amendments. Mr. Speaker, I beg that you intervene on this and ensure that the right thing is done to these Kenyans and that public money is not siphoned and taken to private universities. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, so many of you have interventions.
Yeah.
Before I do that, let me hear Leader of Majority. Let me hear Leader of Majority.
Yes. Honorable Speaker, I've heard the comments that have been made by members on the purported constitutional issues, and I will leave that to you to guide. But from what I've heard, the issues seem to be first on the issues of the students being placed in private universities. And for those who may have chosen to ignore the truth of the matter, is that there was a time that before the exams were re-rationalized, everyone was passing. And the number of spaces in public universities were all taken up. And hence, the students who had passed but could not find a place in public universities were then placed in private universities. And the government would pay a certain capitation. In fact, it's cheaper to educate students in private university because only the capitation is paid than in a public university where, apart from the capitation, they also get the grants, the buildings, and lecturers are paid for by the public. But we are not talking here about private versus public universities. We are talking about Kenyan students of Kenyan parents who have passed, but they don't have a space in a public university because the spaces are not available. And hence, I hear we can expand, but universities are not like starting up a kiosk, and that's why most of those universities have failed, because we're done in an expansionist way, yeah, without even regard to even the quality of lecturers you need. We just passed a law here that requires that every lecturers in universities must have a PhD. How many PhDs do we have in this country? It's not even enough for the but I don't want to argue with the Honorable, but I would want to contribute. So there is a history as to why the students were placed. I was in the education committee, and I know we looked at all these matters, and we decided that the best way forward is not to remove those students who have been placed in a private university midway through their course. Let them finish, but progressively, as the spaces become available in the public universities, the placement service to now give priority to the public universities. And as you rightly put it, members put it, it's up to the choice. If a student wants to move from public to a private university, they have that choice, and they go and pay the top-up, whatever it is. But this bill is not, and I'm looking at the bill, there's nowhere in this bill that is saying that students shall be placed in private universities to the exclusion of public universities. Whoever is saying that is not quoting from this bill, because it's not there, right? It's not in this bill. So there are some things that people have heard in social media, but it's not in the bill. And I think when we are talking of the Constitution and the bill, I would wish members to say that clause number this is discriminatory, is against the Constitution because it's saying ABCD. But there's nowhere in this bill. In fact, the only thing that has is within the powers of the board to apportion money to both public and to give grants, conditional grants, to private universities where already there are students who have been placed, just to make it legit that the board can actually give that money. But the bill does not anywhere state that students shall be placed in private at the expense of public. That is some imagination that's being introduced on the floor of the House. The other thing we want to debunk is that this bill, I published this bill in July of 2021. That is almost a year ago. So there's nothing to do with that we are debating this bill or we are introducing this bill just because we are going for the Synodere recess. It's been with us in this House for 1 year. And the committee did the report, and then there were the same issues that were raised. Members were requested to go to the committee, and I've seen reports of the committee which also even bring up the points of, for example, on clause 2, there was a proposal by Honorable David Sankoch, which was adopted by the committee. There's a proposal by Honorable Bayer, I think 2 of them, yeah, to clause 7 and clause 6A, which were proposals by the member and were adopted by the committee, and is in the committee report. So now, when I hear that members saying that they were not considered, yeah, the Honorable Murugara, I think he has already told us his were adopted. The Honorable Carrier, yeah, were adopted, and basically, I think the import of winnowing is that if you feel that the committee has not taken your recommendation, you can bring them to the floor of the House. And it's on that basis that I believe that the Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah has brought proposals to clause 16 to bring in the issue of audit, public audit of beneficiaries in private universities, which is the right thing to do. But opposing it, that we should not continue when you have done the right thing, which is bringing an amendment, is doublespeak. But be that as may, I think it's important that we, and I think you did mention yesterday or day before, that committees have applied a lot of energy in reviewing these bills. It will be unfortunate that when we are just about to finish so that we can get the law for universities and look at the work that's been done by the committees, that we should, because there's something we don't like or our amendment has not been agreed upon by the committee, that we should now try to bring things through a very roundabout route, that the bill is unconstitutional. If it's unconstitutional, the court will declare it unconstitutional. But I think at this point, I would urge, Honorable Speaker, that let members bring amendments, including as late as now, to ensure that they have their issues sorted out. But we should not deny the Kenyan universities the amendments that are well thought out in this bill, which is to change the governance structures, which is to create some of the things that have been missing, and also not to be the agents of some of the vice chancellors who are likely to be affected by the changes because they don't want to change in their institutions. And because of that, they are actively lobbying that there should be no change in the way they are appointed so that they can continue with the status quo. And we have to look at the bigger governance of our universities because all the examples that are being given, these universities are not failing because it's in Pwani or it's in Eldoret. They are failing because of management. The Masai Mara saga tells us a lot in terms of what happened. But some of those people want the status quo maintained, so they are not accountable to the minister. Now, the government is the biggest sponsor of the universities. It's the financier. Yet the universities don't want to be accountable to their cabinet secretary for education. They want to be accountable to their own independent councils. Yet they don't receive money from councils. They receive monies from the public coffers given through this parliament, but they don't want to be accountable to the cabinet secretary. And they don't want to be appointed or removed by the cabinet secretary. Yet that is the same person who gives the money. And who pays the piper must be given the power to call the tune. So those are some of the things that we might not be coming out. And the fight on the constitutionality is more to defend interests out there that would want to maintain the status quo so they can continue plundering the universities, and our students, our children, will never have a standing university where they can go. So, Mr. Speaker, I would beg that you use your experience and wisdom on this matter, and let's allow the committee to continue, and members will be at liberty to bring in amendments or to oppose amendments that they believe are not good for the country. But keeping it in abeyance will actually be wasting a lot of time and parliamentary funds that have been applied in this. This committee has sat in the original, during the first public participation. They've been taken back, they've been taken to winnowing, and it gets to a point where even the committee gets tired that, you know, their work is not being appreciated by the rest of the House.
All of you have indicated that you want to say something. So don't bother raising up your hand. Just press your intervention button so that I just follow the list as it is. Yeah? So that we don't have to, you know, nobody needs to raise. Don't raise up your hand. Your hand will be seen through the intervention button. Member for Endebess.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
And I'll just follow it now the way it is. Doesn't matter, even if three of you are on one side, that's the way I'll just follow it.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I think it's important that we seek your advice on this matter, because when you look at the issues which Honorable Ishungwa has raised, especially for us who we come in contact with the students who have been placed either in public universities or in the private universities, it's a big challenge, because you find that many of these students, once they have been placed in the private universities, they have to do some bit of topping up to be able to fill the cap. Now here we are saying that both public universities and the private universities to get grants which are equal per student. That means the students who are in public universities will have a more advantage than even those who are in private universities. But at the same time, I allowed you, Majority Leader, to prosecute your case. Please allow me to also prosecute mine. Majority Leader tells us in the same bill there is appointment by the cabinet secretaries of the University Council. There is a veto power which we are giving the cabinet secretary in terms of even who becomes the vice chancellor. I think that is a threat to the independence of the university institutions. I know I appeared before the Education Committee some times back, and the cabinet secretary and the peers were saying we are helpless in as far as managing universities are concerned. But the university charter provides that university institutions are independent bodies worldwide. It's not just here in Kenya. Even whether you are in the US, you are in the Europe, in wherever you are, universities are supposed to be independent institutions, because the degrees that they are going to offer must be beyond reproach. That is why even within our own country, we have to say, is it, whether you come with papers from India or wherever, it has to be also, the Council of the University Education must be able to ratify that these are correctly. It's a chartered university. So I think the independence of the universities must be protected. We should not have a situation, because universities are institutions for posterity. While governments will come and go, you'll have a cabinet secretary who will be there maybe for 5 years or whatever, but that should not interfere with the university education, because university education is sacred. It's supposed to be protected for generations to come. So with those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I think it's important that as we move into that, I think if it proceeds, then we'll have to bring amendments to protect university institutions. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Member for the South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I similarly do rise to raise a constitutional issue, Mr. Speaker. And the rostrum that I'm standing on is actually Article 201 of this constitution, Mr. Speaker, of the Kenya Constitution, and because the Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah had gone deep into it, I will not even read it verbatim. But Mr. Speaker, my prayer is actually that you would get time to just analyze all these amendments that are being brought by the committee and amendments that are being brought by individual members of parliament, so that you can identify the ones that go against the Constitution, and you can expunge these from this bill, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, this is not curious. Yourself and even your very esteemed predecessors have actually pronounced themselves on this issue, Mr. Speaker, that when an issue of constitutionality is raised, it cannot be put to a vote. So this is not a matter of putting it to a vote, either yes or no. This is actually a constitutional matter. Mr. Speaker, to my mind, the bill before us is actually the private universities bill, or even worse, the death of the public universities bill, Mr. Speaker. And for this, I do not see the hurry as to why we should be prosecuting it in the 11th hour of this 12th Parliament, Mr. Speaker, especially with the raft of amendments, a plethora of amendments that need to be put to this bill. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, when amendments get to this threshold, it even warrants for an actual republication of the bill. Because when we are amending each and every article of this bill, Mr. Speaker, it means we are even better off just doing a new bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I look at this bill, and I have been party to the debate that has gone on, including my contributions in the second reading, Mr. Speaker, when I look at it as it is being presented this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, this is actually the Committee of Education conducting a post-mortem on our public universities, Mr. Speaker, after successfully killing and annihilating our public universities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm requesting that you know, with your discretion, because you have institutional memory and wisdom, to actually pull down this bill on a number of issues, Mr. Speaker. One, so that you have the time to attend to the constitutional issues that are being raised here. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, what is being said by the leader of majority is actually provocative, Mr. Speaker, because what he is reporting here is not what actually happened, Mr. Speaker. I had a raft of amendments that I had proposed. I was judicious enough and diligent enough to appear before this committee for the harmonization. But Mr. Speaker, to my shock and awe, when I got there, out of all my amendments, I was only asked to prosecute one amendment that was actually not contentious, about the tenure of a CEO at COOPS, Mr. Speaker. All the other amendments never made it for this harmonization. I only prosecuted one amendment before this committee out of the many amendments I had. Mr. Speaker, it would be wrong for us to legislate in anger. There is no hurry, Mr. Speaker. If we could leave this to the 13th Parliament, they would even have time to prosecute it better, so that we are able to look for a remedy to the right ailment, Mr. Speaker, rather than provide a remedy to the long ailment, while the mischief itself, the real mischief that is ailing public education, remains unattended to, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, when we have students being enrolled in private universities against their own will, Mr. Speaker, that in itself should be an issue of alarm. But to correct the leader of majority, that is not the only issue on this bill, Mr. Speaker. Constitutionally, this bill is actually interfering with the right to education, Mr. Speaker. This is Article 43 and Article 53 of our Constitution, Mr. Speaker. And we know what has been happening to us, Mr. Speaker. As members of Parliament, every week we are attending harambes for students who are in private universities, never chose to be there. And you know what happens, Mr. Speaker, is that, for example, if you're taking a professional course like law, you can get that for 40,000 shillings in a public university. However, if you take it in a private university, that price could even be tripled. The cost of education could actually be tripled to that, Mr. Speaker, disenfranchising very many learners, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that this is not the kind of bill that we should be passing at such a late hour in the life of this parliament. But Mr. Speaker, most importantly, which I think is an issue that you should consider when you're making your decision, is that I believe this is one of the bills that is a candidate to interrogation as to how it ended on the floor of this bill, of this House, Mr. Speaker. And before that, it would also be important, maybe for even DCI or even the EACC, to step in and find out how this bill ended up in cabinet, Mr. Speaker, because there is no way a government can be the one cannibalizing its own institutions and trying to put that into legislation and trying to pass it through this parliament, Mr. Speaker, and in that way spelling a death of our public universities, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, my prayer is that you can consider the constitutional issues that have been raised here, the process issues that have been raised here, the issues that have to do with the disenfranchisement of students, Mr. Speaker, as would happen if we pass this bill. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, you can have a look at all these amendments and see that I would be right to say that this bill is right for republication because it has too many amendments. We actually, if we go into the committee of the whole House, we shall be rewriting an entire bill. Mr. Speaker, I shall stand to be counted as one of the people in the 12th Parliament who stood to defend the public university against, when the leader of the majority talks about interests, then we question then what interests are driving the haste to pass this bill in the format that it is in, Mr. Speaker. We would like to know what interests are championing for this to be rushed. And I'm not blaming the leader of majority. Neither am I placing the blame on the Attorney General who processes government bills. I'm just saying that it is very curious the manner in which this bill found itself in cabinet and how it found itself on this floor. And my prayer, Mr. Speaker, is that you could step down this item from the order paper so that it can be prosecuted at the right time. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Is it possible that is the chair of the committee? Because, you know, some of the issues being raised by members, I think the leader majority cannot be privy to them, like the issues that you've just raised. It would be very important that the chair, we could hear the chair make some comments. A member from Vita, be brief also. You don't have a card?
My card is inside.
How is it? Use the mic next. The mic next to you. Be brief, please, so that we can.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I've heard a lot of the issues that have been raised here. One, Mr. Speaker, every single member is accusing the leader of majority of trying to rush this. No. I think the honourable member needs to. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill that has been in this House for a year. For a year. During that year, Mr. Speaker, members of Parliament, whether here or not here, were part and parcel of trying to go through all these issues. Mr. Speaker, issues have been raised here that universities all over the world. Mr. Speaker, Yale University is a private university. It's one of the best universities in the world. Mr. Speaker, Cambridge is funded by society. People give their money for purposes. Oxford University, Mr. Speaker, and the list goes on. However, Mr. Speaker, I've listened with a lot of the issues that the members have raised here, and constitutionalism. Article 43, Mr. Speaker, talks about economic and social rights and the right to education. If we're going to now say that we are denying public funds to go to a university, then be ready to answer to every single child who is in a private secondary school, because it is you in this very House who have raised that matter. Mr. Speaker, because then secondly, Mr. Speaker, issue of Article 201, Mr. Speaker, public finance. It just talks about using of funding in a prudent manner. Mr. Speaker, I'm expecting that this House that this House, if at all the issue is matters to do with forcing a child to go to a private university, I'm expecting a very strong amendment to say no one shall be forced to go into a private university unless it is a university of their own choice. Learn to go through the book of accounts of all these universities. There's a problem. Vacuum always opens opportunities. None of these private universities would be in existence if there was no vacuum. Then you need to ask yourself, is the problem that we don't have enough universities? That cannot be the case. We have universities, and those universities, the problem that is there, and I'm expecting the honorable members who are here to say that, you know what, let us come up with a way that those public universities, who, by the way, Mr. Speaker, sir, are state corporations, and those public universities, is not that they are not funded. They are funded. As state corporations, yes, they are funded. They are yes. You know, Mr. Speaker, you know, people need to realize and ask themselves, Mr. Speaker, forgive me for this nature.
Don't address the honorable buyer.
But you know, Mr. Speaker, what is most important?
Honorable Abdul Swamad.
Honorable Speaker,
one minute. Don't respond to what the Honorable Owen Baya is saying. You are the chairman of the Public Investments Committee, and you know that in history, if you go through it, you see that I'm a past chair of that committee. And I do know that the Auditor General's reports on all public universities are tabled before the Public Investments Committee.
Thank you.
So, this is what is in law is not supposed to be even sorted out here.
And history has it, Mr. Speaker, that whoever has sat on the position you have sat and I have sat are destined for greater things. But that is a discussion for another day. But what is most important, Mr. Speaker, all I'm saying is, I think what is most important, we need to come out and look at ways of sealing the loopholes within our public universities. And if the Vice Chancellors wish to be accounting officers, which there's nothing wrong with that, then they have to be accountable as well, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Kupata Yes My Love kama skiza tune yako, dial *811 *816#.
Mutiso, wewe nafanya nini hiyo? Wacha nieleza, panataka hiyo kitu. Panataka Mutiso.
Mbo sasa hiyo tu unakuja unaanza kunizuzia kwa nini hata